Today, from the time you woke up this morning till the time you go back home and go to sleep, 3,000 Kenyan babies would have been born. Over 1 million Kenyan babies would be born every year. Which means that every year, with the number of young people that are joining the workforce, it's between the age group of 15 to 24 that you're going to find close to 1 million young people joining the workforce. Now, imagine that every 24 hours, nearly 33,000 young people in Africa are joining the workforce. And with that number, imagine that we get approximately close to 10 to 12 million young people in Africa joining the workforce. Kenya, ladies and gentlemen, needs 1 million jobs every year for the next 10 years to cater to this expanding youth bulge. But we are creating barely about 100,000 to 150,000 new jobs. Now, unemployment is a scourge. Unemployment has many challenges that accompany it. For example, the scourge of violent extremism in Africa. The United Nations Development Programme recently did an event and a study called The Journey to Violent Extremism in Africa. Look at the reasons that people join violent extremist groups, and the first and foremost amongst it is extreme poverty. Second is youth marginalization. Third is increasing inequality. Fourth is instability. And fifth is high levels of illiteracy. These are the primary contributors. It is not religion that is defining insurgencies and violent extremism. It is not your ethnicity which defines it. It's that lack of opportunity. It's that sense of despondency. It's that sense of hopelessness. And the best way to tackle it is to really look at the challenges of what I would term as 4 E's, and keep these 4 E's in mind. The first and foremost is the right education and skills for the right emerging market. Without that, we will not be able to find the kind of jobs that are needed or find employable people for those jobs. Second is empowerment. As the previous speaker said, unless and until we make sure that women join the workforce, unless and until we make sure that every girl achieves her full human potential, Kenya or Africa will not realize its full potential, because 50% of that workforce is being left behind. The third is a Marshall Plan of employment. We need employment at a scale which is tremendous. That Marshall Plan of employment should have the dignity of labor, from a plumber to a mason to a carpenter to a scientist to a road worker to a bridge builder. But the whole scope must offer us that opportunity. You just saw a slide before this of a boat, and that is the real story of the African migrant. That is the real story of what happened in Lampedusa. That is the real story of young people escaping their situation at home, escaping instability, escaping poverty, escaping a lack of opportunity, and making that journey. Imagine when from the 10 to 12 million African young people that join the workforce with barely about 3 million jobs, when those numbers start to cross the oceans, it's not just Africa experiencing instability, it's also the West and other parts of the world experiencing instability. Our best opportunity is to make those investments in those 4 E's, the 4th E being equity. When there is inequity, when there is marginalization, when there are people who are being left out of the development curve, there are challenges that accompany it. We want to change that status quo. We want to change that situation. And that can't happen by one entity. That happens when the public-private partnerships come together, when the whole agenda of right political will comes together, when public policy accompanies that political will, when partnerships come into play. And this partnerships covers everything because the future is here. Let me give you another statistic. By 2030, agriculture in Africa will be $1 trillion worth. The median age of a farmer, ladies and gentlemen, in Kenya is 61. The median age of this country is 18. This country's population was the same as Sweden in 1956, 7 million. Today, Sweden is 10 million, Kenya is 46 million. By 2030, Kenya will be 65 million. By 2050, Kenya will be 85 million. By 2050, Africa will be 830 million. By 2050, there will be 850 million young people in Africa. Now, whether this is a demographic dividend or a disaster depends on exactly those 4 E's that we need to invest in now, because if we do it right, not only does Africa become the future markets for the rest of the world, but becomes the supplier of phenomenal human capital to the rest of the world. But that incentive, that initiative, has to come through to us collectively as the UN family, as schools, as public policy experts, as our political leadership, and the private sector. 2 things will underpin this change, which need to be the prime movers. The right education and skill set is not just achieving a master's degree and getting higher degrees. It's also being a good, capable plumber and a carpenter and all that. It must be about the dignity of labor. So the right education and skills for that evolving market. And the second is access to good primary health care. That defines the total fertility rate of a woman. Good health care, the birth of a child in many counties in Kenya, where the total fertility rate is between 7 and 8, is like the roll of a dice. Only because people don't know how many of these children will survive. Once there is a predictability, once a woman is sure that her children will survive, then what happens is she's able to plan her family. A woman must have the choice over her reproductive health and the right over her own body. It should not be defined by anybody else. That is what will change the economy, not just of Kenya, but the economy of Africa. Because unless we see the microeconomic change at the household level, where the husband and wife both earn an income, what happens then is children are better educated, there is better nutrition, there is better opportunities for that child. And that's what starts to change it. So if you look at Western Europe, post-Second World War, where they came out of the misery that inundated them, there was a Marshall Plan that came into play, women joined the workforce, and as a result of which, they started to prosper. Look at the Asian tigers. The model of South Korea, Singapore, Japan, Thailand, Malaysia, countries that really pushed their economies forward, pulled people out of poverty. That's the opportunity that awaits us here in Africa. But those change agents are going to be the young, you, from this school. The young in Africa will define that way forward. So we have no choice now to roll up our sleeves to move this whole agenda forward, because we have to make sure that Kenya, like the rest of Africa, grows rich before it grows old. Thank you.